our business. It started out, and we have an election.
This CBS News special report is part of our continuing coverage of the American Summit. From San Francisco, here is Dan Rather.
And good afternoon again from the city by the bay. Mikhail Gorbachev is about to make the major address of his 5-day U.S. visit. In just a few minutes, he'll be speaking at Stanford University. That's about 30 miles south of San Francisco. Gorbachev drove to Stanford from San Francisco after a meeting this morning with former President Ronald Reagan. He and Raisa Gorbachev met the Reagans for about a half hour over coffee to talk about old times. Barry Peterson, our Moscow correspondent who's traveling with the Gorbachev party, is on the Stanford campus. Barry?
Well, the reaction here, Dan, was really quite enthusiastic, and I think Gorbachev had a very good time, as is his style. First, he was running late, and second, it didn't seem to bother him. He kept just waiting from one crowd to another, shaking hands, that sort of thing. Now, this speech that he's about to give is apparently going to be quite popular here. So popular, Dan, that we're told that scalpers are trying to sell the tickets. At last we heard for as much as $1,500 for a seat to get in and see Mikhail Gorbachev live and hear what he has to say. Everyone here seems to just kind of want to reach out and touch this man.
Well, in that case, our viewers and listeners then are getting a bargain, since they'll be able to see and hear this speech live and up close for free here very shortly. The Gorbachev speech, once he gets started with this Stanford speech, this will be at the Stanford Business School. It's expected to last about a half hour. It is expected to concentrate on foreign affairs and foreign policy, not on business. One of the reasons Mikhail Gorbachev is here in San Francisco is to emphasize that the Soviet Union is, of course, a Pacific power. Gorbachev has started a new long courtship with the Japanese. He also would like to do more business with the South Koreans, the Taiwanese, and those in Singapore, the rising economic powers of the Pacific. Gorbachev, as he has made the case in the United States, will be making the case that the Soviet Union is a good place to do business if you're ready for long-term investment. The Soviet Union, of course, has a lot of natural resources that any rising economic power, or for that matter, established economic power such as the United States, could use. Barry, how is all this playing back home in the Soviet Union? After all, that's one of the important reasons Gorbachev is here.
I think this is Gorby's day for the people in the streets, Dan. This is his day to meet with businessmen. This is his day to talk shop. This is his day to make those important contacts and say, when he goes back home, I met some Americans, I think we've made some progress, I think we can do business with them. I was very intrigued yesterday when he was in Minneapolis in a room full of businessmen. You could see that he knows how to play the capitalist in them, because he said to the Americans, you better move quickly, because if you don't get in here, the Japanese will be here or the Germans will be here. And clearly, Mikhail Gorbachev, the communist, has a really good sense of the pulse of how capitalism works. He's playing to that now because I think he wants to take home this sense that he's made some progress. And I think literally the sense that maybe someday soon what he has accomplished from this trip could mean more goods in the store, a better life, because that's what he really needs, something just that practical.
Now, inside the hall, Barry Peterson is standing outside. Mikhail Gorbachev has appeared now on the platform through a standing ovation before this business school crowd, and the distinguished hosts for this visit of Mikhail and Raisa Gorbachev to the San Francisco Bay, Northern California area. This particular event to be Gorbachev's set-piece speech of his whole American visit. We're told that it will concentrate on foreign policy. So let's pick up the introductions now to Mikhail Gorbachev and soak up this event live and direct from the campus of Stanford University in California.
Distinguished guests, colleagues, Stanford students, it is a deep privilege and honor for us to welcome to Stanford University President Mikhail Gorbachev. I hope you understand how seldom such opportunities come in an ordinary lifetime. It will, I think, not use your time well to try to introduce to you the architect of a great world transformation. But it may make some sense, Mr. President, for me to introduce briefly Stanford University to you. We are an institution devoted to the expansion of human understanding, to the addition of wisdom to learning. We are, like your great nation, a complex and diverse society trying our best to learn to cope better with our diversity. We have many special things: a remarkable faculty, an outstanding student body, the country's longest accelerator, and its best women basketball players. Most of all, we are, like you, committed to making the world better. In that spirit, and in great appreciation of the brightening sheen of optimism you have brought to all of us, it is my privilege to welcome you on behalf of Stanford University. And now I ask my friends in this audience to join me in endorsing that welcome. President Mikhail Gorbachev.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased that within the framework of my state visit to the United States, I am here among you within the walls of the world-famous university. Thank you for your warm hospitality. I think that those who work or study in your university are doubly lucky. It is in California, and California is a special place, even by international standards. And I'm saying this not just by way of a compliment, to say pleasant things to the governor of the state who is here with his wife. I think I'm just stating a fact. It is said that only 5 countries in the world produce a greater gross output than your state. The ideas and technologies of tomorrow are born here in California. California is closely linked economically with Europe, Asia, and Latin America. So this is an appropriate place for a good place where to live, and for me an appropriate place for discussing how the Soviet Union and the United States have positioned themselves on the dividing line between 2 centuries and 2 eras on the coast of the Pacific, which Alexander Herzen, our great countryman, prophetically described as the Mediterranean of the future. It is appropriate now to ponder the destinies of the world, since it is here in San Francisco that the United Nations was founded precisely 45 years ago. I think this is very symbolic that it is this sunny city that was selected as the place where to proclaim the foundation, the establishment of this organization whose efficiency we all need very much. And let us look at the conclusions drawn at that time, right after a horrible war. The United Nations was set up to, I quote, maintain peace and security and remove the political, economic, and social causes of war, to settle disputes in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, to promote relations among nations based on the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. Marvelous words, a marvelous appeal, but alas, it is only now that we have come closer to addressing these tasks in practical terms. It is only now that international politics is really starting to adjust itself to these ideas and principles. And all of us have felt how much we need the United Nations if we really are to move toward a new world, a new kind of relationships in the world in the interest of all countries and nations. For a long time, the Pacific was a theater of confrontations and the arms race. Located on its opposite shores, our two nations found themselves on the opposite sides of the barricades of Asian revolutions. But new winds are now blowing in Asia. It has been developing dynamically according to its own logic, setting impressive examples of economic efficiency and international interaction. The Japanese, the Koreans, the Chinese, and other Asian peoples have lessons for the entire world to learn, including lessons for us and for you. And to avoid finding ourselves on the sidelines in the Pacific, as well as, of course, in Europe, we ought to think about the speediest way to abolish politico-military rivalry. Let us think about the future. Our two countries have more than enough reasons to be partners in building it, in shaping new security structures in Europe and in the Asian-Pacific region, and also in the making of a truly global economy, indeed, in the creation of a new civilization. I am under no illusions as to the possibility of a faster rapprochement or convergence of our two societies. They are quite different. For many years, they were developing in different directions. They probably will never be fully alike. Indeed, there is no need for that. It is important to see the thrust of what is happening as we move toward a world without wars, a world of equality and freedom. In our cooperation to build a better future, I would take as a point of departure the fact that the Cold War is now behind us. And let us not wrangle over who won it, who won the Cold War. There can be no winners in the Cold War, just like in a nuclear war. This truth has already been established. Each and both our countries know that. So any kind of talk about the Cold War being useful to some countries, I think, is just political cheating and irresponsibility. Our two countries who know the burden of the arms race during the Cold War know that particularly well. The Cold War was nurturing our political thinking, our political approaches, our political analysis, and finally the political choice. Finally, we made the political choice that brought us to a new summit, to this new summit, and to the important decisions that open up the way to cooperation between our two great nations, two great peoples. Each of our two countries bears its share of responsibility for the fact that the post-war period in the history of mankind took on the character of an exhausting and dangerous confrontation. It is now, and it's quite logical to say that it is now our common responsibility to make sure that the mechanisms of East-West military confrontation are dismantled as soon as possible. There was a time when military procurement orders were considered, and they are still considered by some, to be the best incentive for economic and technological progress. The Californians, too, paid a tribute to such an approach. I have to note this, there was a time when they did so. But, as I've been told, they were the first to realize that a military economy is ultimately a dead end, even from the standpoint of practical benefit. It is symbolic that as early as the 1970s, the authorities of the Santa Clara County, which then ranked first in per capita military contracts, began to explore ways of demilitarizing the local economy. I hope that as Soviet-American relations improve, military procurement and participation in the arms race will become a thing of the past, not only for your beautiful state, but for both our great powers. Science has played a major role in the arms race. Yet science was the first to speak out authoritatively against this folly and to look for a way out. Here we have to give credit to the joint efforts of Soviet and American scientists to which Stanford University scientists have made a very substantial contribution. I am referring to the development of the basic principles for such concepts as international security and strategic stability. Without a serious and objective approach to defining strategic stability and mutual security, without a scientific analysis taking into account all factors, economic, political, scientific, military, technical, and politico-military, it is impossible to make the right decisions on cardinal issues of nuclear and conventional arms reductions. The scientists of our two countries work together to make the necessary estimates and discuss them over and over again. They approach this work as a scientific project and put aside the political and military ambitions which had long stood in the way of a solution. Thus, they helped to arrive at major political decisions, including those adopted over these days in Washington. So today I am pleased to mention the names of Stanford University scientists who for many years have worked with patience and perseverance on this important project. All of them have a very high academic reputation and all profoundly believe in the need for peace and the triumph of reason and justice. Among them I would like to mention Wolfgang Panofsky, Sidney Drell, William Perry, David Holloway, and others from the Center for International Security and Arms Control. Together with their colleagues in the Committee of Soviet Scientists against the nuclear threat, Drs. Velikov, Osipyan, Yuri Osipyan, Sagdeyev, Sagdeyev and others, they have been doing much to build bridges of trust between our countries. I take advantage of this opportunity to thank all of them most warmly, and I hope that you will join with me in this. Stanford scientists have also done much to initiate contacts between representatives of both countries' defense industries on the problem of conversion. This promising area in our relations can bring substantial dividends to all of us. New steps in disarmament require major restrictions on the development of advanced weapon systems. Soviet and American scientists will have a lot of work to do in this area too, in order to identify the borderline between permissible modernization and a qualitative arms race. I think we should keep in mind this task, because we don't want new weapons to come to replace nuclear weapons, because those new weapons would still be weapons of mass destruction. I think that the warning to this effect is quite necessary and quite appropriate and timely at this moment. We would like scientists and engineers to work on these issues and on other disarmament problems, such as the prohibition of chemical weapons, the Vienna talks, and short-range nuclear weapons, we would like scientists and engineers to work on those problems, showing more rather than less ingenuity than in developing modern weapons. President Bush and I had to note that it is not that easy to abandon, to abolish those weapons, and to destroy those weapons once we've decided to scrap them. We need technologies for destroying those dangerous weapons, and I think here too we have to work together in order to make sure that there is no damage done to the environment and to people's health. So here we have problems too, but I hope that we will cope with those problems by joining our efforts.
Ученые Стэнфорда, как я слышал, хотят вместе с советскими коллегами.
I've heard that Stanford scientists would like
Это тоже жизненное дело на главном направлении мирового развития.
Cooperate closely with their Soviet colleagues on the problem of the environment. This too is an area of vital importance for world development. I must also note Stanford's contribution to Soviet-American cooperation on high-temperature superconductivity. Our two countries are leaders in this field. I would like to mention Stanford professors Ted Jabal and Mike Beasley, the organizers of last summer's World Conference on Superconductivity, in which more than 30 Soviet scientists took part. The Soviet Union and the United States are leaders in such areas as the fundamental properties of matter, solid-state physics, mathematics, physical chemistry, astronomy and space research, and biological sciences. Cooperation in the humanities would also be of great interest. I know of the unique Stanford Library in the Hoover Tower, a rich collection of materials on the Russian Revolution. For our part, we could invite Stanford researchers to work on joint projects in historical and literary archives in the Soviet Union. To sum up, we are in favor of wide-ranging cooperation of free and forceful minds who are aware of their responsibility for our common future and who are open to joint creative efforts and a free and unimpeded exchange of their results. Ladies and gentlemen, in our country we have opted for fundamental changes. Our perestroika is a result of profound trends taking place in our society. In 5 years, over the last 5 years, our country has become different. But I also feel that the whole mankind is entering a new age and that the world is beginning to obey new laws and logic to which we have yet to adjust ourselves. 50 years ago, the great Russian scientist Vladimir Vernadsky wrote, and I quote, "Mankind is a single entity. Its life, for all its diversity, has become one and indivisible. An event taking place anywhere on any continent or ocean is reflected and has repercussions, both small and great, in many other places, everywhere on the Earth's surface." I continue quoting from Vernadsky. Telegraph, telephone, radio, airplanes, and airships cover the entire globe. Communications are becoming easier and more rapid. With each passing year, they become more organized and grow dynamically. This process of man's total settlement of the biosphere is determined by the historic development of human thought and is associated most closely with the increased speed of communications, advances in transportation technologies, and the possibilities of immediate dissemination and simultaneous discussion of ideas throughout our entire planet. I admire these thoughts because all of this was said 50 years ago. This prediction has indeed come true. We are witnessing an evolution of international relations toward increasingly open and mass-scale human communication. And this greatly increases the role of creative and positive policies. But equally, it raises the price of mistakes, the price we must pay for adherence to outdated dogmas, routine, and the old thinking. For a new type of progress throughout the world to become a reality, everyone must change. Tolerance is the alpha and omega of a new world order. Without tolerance and respect for one's partner, without understanding each other's concerns and problems, we are bound to fail. And that calls for the development of a new approach to the structures of security and cooperation, and even alliance building. I'm convinced that we stand on the threshold of revising the concept of alliance building. Until now, alliances have been built on a selective and, in fact, discriminatory basis. They were based on setting countries against each other. They divided countries and peoples much more than they united them. This system was perfected during the years of the Cold War, producing the twin antipodes of the North Atlantic Alliance and the Warsaw Pact. But we are approaching a time when the very principle of alliance building should become different. It should mean unity to create conditions for a life worthy of a human being, protect the environment, combat hunger, diseases, drug addiction, and ignorance. It is in the common interest of our two countries and nations not to fight this trend toward new cooperation, but rather to promote it. And I think that both the United States and the Soviet Union, if they understand the need for this and if they really work together, can contribute in a decisive way toward placing our entire civilization on the road of genuinely peaceful development. I see many young people here. There are many more young people outside this room, of course, and I'm glad that I was able to greet them too. And so, concluding my remarks, I would like to address them. I would like to address young people. Your generation will not only be creating a new world, but will also live in it. Much of it will certainly be different from whatever we can imagine now, and from even what I've been saying to you here from this rostrum. The challenge is to make sure that people in that new world live a better life in greater freedom. And much will depend on you, the men and women of science. I wish you success in this great and unprecedented undertaking. Thank you.
Mikhail Gorbachev concluding his remarks at Stanford University. This is our live CBS News coverage of Gorbachev's foreign policy address at the business school at Stanford University this afternoon. Stanford, of course, being just outside of San Francisco. Gorbachev emphasizing what he sees as a new world order, one which he acknowledged that most people, including himself, perhaps do not yet fully comprehend. Calling for new alliances, new cooperation to battle such things as hunger and problems of the environment. Unlike American presidents, Gorbachev was not using teleprompter. And unlike a lot of American politicians, he had no reluctance to put on his glasses there. Standing by just outside the hall where the address was made now is our Moscow correspondent, Barry Peterson, who's been traveling with the Gorbachev party here as part of this American tour. Barry, your thoughts on, again, how this speech will play at home in the Soviet Union?
Well, I think it'll play well, Dan, and there were a couple of major themes that seemed to come out of it. I'm not sure which audience it was really aimed at. For instance, the idea of partnership, which has really been Gorbachev's theme all along, this time played in a very unique sense of saying the Soviet Union and the United States have to be partners to deal with the kind of increased competition coming from other Asian countries. Another major theme, which I think was aimed both at the United States and at the Soviet Union, is the question of dismantling those arms industries. In other words, saying, let's start building things for peace. It was kind of a Rotary Club speech, if you will. He mentioned many names of Stanford professors. He came to say things they really liked. And at the end, he said, let's combat environment, disease, that sort of thing, a bit like a congressman running for office in California. Dan?
Joining us now, thank you, Barry. Joining us now from New York, our CBS News consultants. First, Sergei Plekhanov from the USA-Canada Institute in Moscow. Sergei, some concentration in this Gorbachev speech at Stanford University on the Pacific Rim and the fact that the Soviet Union is a Pacific power. Is this a forerunner, a precursor, if you will, of a whole new opening to Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and the other rising economic powers of the far Pacific Rim?
I think it clearly is. Gorbachev has been thinking about a new Pacific strategy for the Soviet Union for several years now. His speech at Vladivostok actually was the opening stage, if you will, of the new Pacific policy. And now he clearly thinks that it's time to activate that policy. And of course, Japan is important for the Soviet Union. South Korea is important as economic partners, and also, as far as Japan is concerned, important as examples as to how high technologies can be developed, how economic growth should be fostered, and so on. And of course, it's very important that a new security system be built in the Pacific, which would include the great neighbors, United States and the Soviet Union, as well as other Asia-Pacific countries.
Keeping in mind that President Gorbachev plans to visit Japan later this year, and that he'll be meeting here in Northern California, if things go according to schedule, with the President of South Korea, who is also here this week. Stephen Cohen, professor and a CBS News consultant, professor at Princeton University. Steve Cohen, today we know that Chinese students in Beijing, again, are protesting what they see as the oppression, the continuing oppression of an old-line, hard-line communist regime. And it was a year ago, almost exactly a year ago in China, when the students were almost making a breakthrough to freedom and democracy. This brings to mind, as Gorbachev said today, he wanted to direct his remark to students. What about Soviet students? And what about the possibility of a Tiananmen Square in the Soviet Union?
That's an important question, Dan. It's certainly true that it's going to be students who will inherit whatever consequences derive from Gorbachev's reforms. The situation in the Soviet Union concerning students, though, is different from China. For one thing, Gorbachev's political reforms, democratizing reforms, have run far ahead of the economic reforms. That's different from in China. Secondly, the Soviet students live, though worse than American students, better than Chinese students at the university. But above all, I would draw your attention to the fact that Soviet university students under Gorbachev have created about 60,000 so-called informal, that is unofficial, political organizations all across that vast country. And that's the beginning of the multi-party system emerging in the Soviet Union today.
Well, noting that we'll have a full report from China today on tonight's CBS Evening News. For now, the Mikhail Gorbachev first cross-country tour of America is nearing the point where in a few hours we'll be able to say it is over. Next up, Gorbachev returns to San Francisco from Stanford University in Palo Alto for a luncheon with U.S. corporate leaders. In effect, he'll be saying, let's make a deal. Later in the day, the Soviet president has an unprecedented meeting with the president of South Korea. Gorbachev is scheduled to leave for the Soviet Union later this day. Our CBS News coverage of the final hours of Gorbachev's visit will continue. Coming up, a complete wrap-up of the day on tonight's CBS Evening News will be originating tonight from right here in San Francisco. For now, Dan Rather, we'll see you soon on the Evening News.
This has been a CBS News special report.
Carpet